Black Jungle wants to know, you're flying and lose video behind something. Do you punch out or disarm? That depends entirely on where I'm flying. I'm going to make the judgment call of whether I will do more damage or create more of a problem for whatever's on the ground by punching out versus disarming. Okay? If I'm flying somewhere that's a relatively tight environment, and I know that if I throttle into something, I'm going to cause property damage or potentially injury to a person or, an animal, then I'm going to disarm. Because probably just dumping the quad is more likely to avoid a problem than powering up. On the other hand, if I feel pretty confident that I was flat and level, and if I feel pretty confident that if I do climb, I'm just going to be going out into the woods or something, then I might try to save it. It's a judgment call that you make every single time it happens. And the best thing to do is to never put yourself in a situation where if you lose video, you're uncertain as to whether it's safe to disarm or keep flying. The best case scenario is that you're flying, and whether you choose to disarm or whether you choose to power out and try to get video back, you can feel confident that no one will be hurt and nothing significant will be damaged except maybe your quadcopter. If you're doing a building dive over a populated sidewalk, or you're flying over a street with traffic on it, and you lose video, you have a very hard decision to make, and the consequences of making that decision wrong could be severe, both for you and for someone on the ground. And I'm not going to be like, you kids don't do anything dangerous. You're ruining the hobby. I'm not going to be that guy. There have been times in my life where I've done things that if other people saw them, they'd be like, well, that was risky and I'm not comfortable with it. Most of those things you haven't seen on the internet. But the best case scenario is that you don't put yourself in that situation. If you're in that situation, you have to make a judgment call. I was recently, I was watching a beginner fly. I'm standing right next to him. And he was flying in an area where if he had disarmed, he potentially could have crashed on things that shouldn't be crashed on. And he was doing it with the full permission and consent of the people in charge of the things that could be crashed on. And yet, still, it would have been very awkward for him and potentially for me if he had dumped his quad and landed on somebody's car, even though he technically had permission to be doing what he was doing. It was one of those situations where, like, yeah, go ahead, do it. Don't fuck it up. And then he lost video and pretend it was like, oh shit. And I pulled my goggles off and I looked around. Well, first I waited for a fraction of a second to see if video was going to come back. It didn't come back. I lifted my goggles. Thankfully, I saw his quadcopter up in the air. I got visual on it. I took his controller. I immediately flipped it into angle mode because I can't fly line of sight, acro mode very well. And then thankfully I just guessed at what throttle position would cause it to not fly away. And I pushed the sticks around. I figured out which way it was flying and I got it home line of sight. That was lucky. If I had lifted my goggles and not been able to see the aircraft, I would have had no choice but to disarm. And then just cross my fingers that it landed somewhere safe and didn't hurt somebody and didn't cause embarrassing property damage. It was a hair-raising moment. And thankfully, it worked out. You just have to make that call. And if you make the call wrong, you have to own up to the consequences. And if you're not comfortable with that, then don't put yourself in that situation is my actual advice.